In the vast, rolling hills of southern Ohio, beneath the heavy clouds of a late fall morning, the small community of Bradbury was waking up to its usual rhythm. The familiar scent of damp earth and the muted clinking of tools from nearby barns filled the air. Bradbury wasn't much, just a few dozen homes and a scattered collection of farms, each one tied to the land in ways that felt as old as the soil itself. It was a place where families had tilled and sowed for generations, and in the early mornings, when the mist hung low over the fields, the sense of history felt palpable, almost sacred. But for Everett Harper, 62, this land was both a sanctuary and a prison. Everett had lived here his entire life. His father had been the kind of man who understood the land with an almost reverent touch, knowing when to sow and when to rest, when to mend the fences and when to let the cattle graze. It was the sort of life that ran in the blood, and for Everett, the farm was everything, until it wasn't. It had been 10 years since his brother, Robert, disappeared from the family farm without a trace. Robert had been the younger one, the dreamer, always talking about going somewhere else, doing something bigger. Everett could remember the last conversation they had, arguing about the future of the farm, how it wasn't enough for Robert. Robert had wanted to sell it, move to the city, start fresh. But Everett had refused. The farm, with its old grain silos and rusted tractors, had a soul, and Everett couldn't imagine walking away from it. Robert had stormed off that day, muttering about a deal with the land company that would change everything. He was never seen again. For a decade, Everett held on to the hope that his brother had simply walked away, perhaps found something else in the world. But deep down, Everett knew the truth was more complicated than that. The land had a way of holding on to its secrets, and there were things about Robert's disappearance that never added up. The police had done their work, or so they claimed, and the case had gone cold. Yet Everett couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was hiding the truth. Now, as the sun began to break through the gray sky, Everett stood on the edge of a field, staring out over the land that had once been his brother's pride. He had been walking the far edge of the farm near the old corn silo when he found it, just barely visible under a pile of old, discarded tools. It was a small, leather-bound notebook, worn and frayed at the edges, but unmistakably familiar. It was Robert's. Everett hesitated for only a moment before bending down to pick it up. It was too much of a coincidence, too strange. He flipped open the notebook carefully, feeling a pang of loss in his chest. The first pages were filled with Robert's usual ramblings, half-written plans for the farm, sketches of equipment, even a few thoughts about expanding into organic crops, ideas Everett had never fully understood. But as he turned the pages, one entry stood out. A small, hastily scribbled note, barely legible. "The silos aren't safe. They've been using them for more than just grain. Meet me here after dark. Don't trust them." It was dated just a week before Robert disappeared. Everett felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. The silos. Those were the very same silos Robert had been so obsessed with, the ones that had always been the heart of their family farm, where they stored grain year-round. But Everett had never heard anything strange about them, not until now. That note, though, told a different story. He quickly stuffed the notebook into his coat pocket, his mind racing. It had been years since he last thought about Robert's disappearance, but now that familiar feeling of unease began to settle in once again. There were too many questions. Too many unknowns. And the more Everett thought about it, the more it became clear that Robert hadn't simply walked away. He discovered something that had cost him his life. As Everett turned to leave the field, his boots crunching through the fallen leaves, he couldn't help but wonder who else knew about the silos. Who else had been watching, waiting? It wasn't just the land that kept secrets, it was the people, too. And someone didn't want those secrets to be found. Back at the farmhouse, Everett sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the notebook. His hands shook as he ran his fingers over the leather cover, remembering all the hours he and Robert had spent talking about the future. Robert had always been driven, always thinking there was more out there than what the land could offer. But now, with this notebook, Everett was beginning to realize that there was more to Robert's story than he had ever known. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen, but it did little to calm the growing unease in his gut. The note had been a warning. A warning about the silos, about something happening on the farm that Everett didn't understand. He stood up, resolved. It was time to find out the truth, no matter where it led. But as he grabbed his coat and prepared to head back toward the silos, Everett's eyes caught sight of something he hadn't noticed before, a car in the distance, parked just outside the fence line. It wasn't a car he recognized. His heart skipped a beat. The farm was supposed to be empty, just him now. No one ever came here. And yet, there it was. A car. Someone was watching. The car parked just outside the fence line was a rusted, nondescript sedan, nothing special. But to Everett, it was everything. His heart raced as he peered out the window of his farmhouse, watching the figure standing next to the vehicle. It was a man, dressed in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, his back to the house as he surveyed the property. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the field, and the man was a silhouette against the fading light. Everett felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't recognize the man, but there was something about him that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He hadn't seen anyone outside of a few neighbors in years. This man didn't belong here. Without thinking, Everett grabbed his jacket and stepped out onto the porch, his boots crunching on the gravel path. As he approached, the man turned, meeting his gaze. There was no hint of recognition in the man's eyes, just a blank, emotionless stare. "You lost?" Everett called, trying to keep his voice steady. The man didn't immediately respond. He just stood there, eyes flicking to the farmhouse, then back to the field. It was almost as if he was taking inventory, making a mental note of everything around him. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough and low. "Just passing through." "Passing through?" Everett raised an eyebrow. "You're a long way from the nearest highway, friend." The man didn't flinch. "Just came to take a look around. Been a long time since I've seen this place. Lotta history here." Everett's heart skipped a beat. "You know this place?" The man nodded slowly, a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, maybe, or something darker. "Used to. Years ago. Before things got complicated." Everett felt his pulse quicken. There was something in the man's words, something that didn't sit right. He was talking like he knew something about the farm, about Robert, about what had happened all those years ago. "Who are you?" Everett asked, stepping closer. The man hesitated, then smiled thinly. "Name's Peter. Peter Harrison. I worked here a long time ago. Back when Robert disappeared?" Everett finished the sentence, his voice quieter now. Peter's eyes hardened, and for a moment, Everett thought he saw a flicker of guilt. But it was gone in an instant. Peter stepped back, his hand resting on the hood of the car. "You've got your own questions, I see," Peter said, his voice casual, but Everett caught the edge of tension in it. "You might want to think carefully before you start digging too deep, Everett." "Digging?" Everett's voice rose slightly. "What are you talking about?" Peter straightened up, his gaze shifting toward the silos in the distance, barely visible against the twilight. "There are things on this farm, things you don't want to stir up. Your brother thought he could handle it. Thought he could change things. But not everyone around here is as keen on letting the past stay buried." Everett's mind raced. "What do you know about the silos?" Peter's face hardened. "The silos are a problem. They've always been. And there's something inside that you don't want to find. Trust me." Before Everett could press him further, Peter turned sharply, heading toward the car. "I'm not here to stir things up, Everett. Just remember what I said." And with that, Peter climbed into the rusted sedan and drove off without another word, leaving Everett standing in the gathering darkness, the weight of his words heavy on his chest. Later that night, as Everett sat at the kitchen table, his hands shaking slightly as he ran through the events of the day, the notebook Robert had left behind seemed to burn a hole in his thoughts. He couldn't let go of the phrase, "The silos aren't safe." Had Robert found something in those silos? Was it connected to the strange man who had just visited? The man had worked here, had known Robert, but his words suggested he knew something far darker. Everett's resolve deepened. He had no choice but to keep digging. But how? And where would he even start? The silos, of course. The place Robert had been last, the place no one had dared to go since his disappearance. The following morning, Everett decided to take a look at the silos. If Robert had hidden something there, he would find it. His heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed his old work gloves, pulling on his boots. The familiar rhythm of farm life was gone now, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. Everything he thought he knew about his family's farm was about to change. The sun was already high in the sky by the time Everett reached the silos. The wind rustled through the tall grass at the edge of the field, the dust swirling in the dry air. The silos, once a place of life and activity, now stood like abandoned sentinels, their metal shells rusted and scarred by the years. He approached slowly, the sharp tang of old grain in the air. The door to the main silo was partially ajar, the lock long broken. With a grunt, Everett pushed it open, the rusty hinges protesting loudly. Inside, the air was thick with the musty smell of stored grain, but something else lingered underneath, an acrid, chemical odor that didn't belong. Everett stepped inside, his flashlight illuminating the dim space. The floor was covered in dust, and the walls were lined with old grain bins. But there, in the far corner of the silo, something caught his eye, a piece of machinery, half buried beneath a pile of old bags of feed. As he stepped closer, his heart skipped. It wasn't just any machinery. It was a small, rusted piece of equipment, one he recognized immediately. It was an old crop duster, used to spray pesticides on fields. But it hadn't been used in years, not since Robert had insisted they stop using harmful chemicals. But this wasn't just any crop duster. It was modified. The markings on it were familiar, Robert's handwriting, scribbled on the side, Test, Phase 2. The knot in Everett's stomach tightened. What was Robert testing? And why had he hidden this here? As he stood there, frozen, the weight of the discovery began to settle in. Someone didn't want these secrets to come out. And someone was willing to do whatever it took to keep them buried. The discovery of the modified crop duster gnawed at Everett's mind as he spent the rest of the day mulling over what it meant. Robert had been testing something. What had he been testing, and why had he hidden this equipment in the silos? The more Everett thought about it, the more it seemed that Robert had found something worth hiding. It wasn't just about the land or the farm, it was something bigger, something that reached far beyond the fields of their small town. By late afternoon, Everett had made up his mind. He needed help. Someone who could make sense of the crop duster and its modifications. And the only person he trusted to help was Jack Reynolds, an old agronomist who had worked with the Harpers for years, first on soil testing and later on crop management. Jack had been retired for nearly a decade, but he still lived in a small house just a few miles away, down the road from the farm. Everett set out in his truck, the fields blurring by as he drove. The air had taken on a chilly edge, and the late autumn sunlight cast long shadows across the road, but his thoughts were consumed with the mystery of the silos. Why had Robert been so determined to find out what was going on with the crops? And what did the strange chemical smell mean? Everett was certain now, someone had been using the farm, using their land, for something that wasn't just about farming. When Everett arrived at Jack's house, he found the old man in the backyard, still tending to a patch of late-season vegetables. Jack was in his mid-70s now, with weathered hands and a face etched with years of working the land. His gray beard and faded overalls made him look every bit the part of a seasoned farmer, but his sharp eyes and quick mind were still intact. "Evening, Jack," Everett called, climbing out of his truck. "Evening, Everett," Jack replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "What brings you out here? Thought you'd given up on farming for good." Everett offered a faint smile. "Guess the land's got a way of calling you back." Jack nodded knowingly, but the look in his eyes softened. "What's on your mind, old friend?" "I found something," Everett said, his voice lowering. He motioned toward the barn. "Something that's got me wondering. I need your help." Jack followed him back to the barn, where Everett had parked the truck. When they reached the silos, Everett took a deep breath before leading Jack inside, where the crop duster lay. The dim light of the flashlight barely illuminated the space, but Jack's sharp eyes caught the strange machinery right away. "What the hell is this?" Jack muttered, his gaze fixing on the old crop duster. He knelt down, inspecting the markings. "This thing's been modified. Looks like someone's been tinkering with it for years." "It's Robert's," Everett said quietly. "He was working with it before he disappeared. He even left a note here, said something about testing. And look at this." He pointed to the note scrawled on the side, "Test, Phase 2. Jack looked up, eyes widening. "This is bad, Everett. This is more than just old equipment. This thing's designed for something specific. It's a spraying system, but for what?" Everett shook his head. "That's what I need you to tell me. This farm's been through everything, weather, drought, disease, but Robert was worried about something more. And whatever he was testing, whatever he found, it led to his disappearance. I know it." Jack stood up slowly, his hands resting on his knees as he processed the situation. He looked up at the silos, then back at Everett. "We need to go over everything again. I don't trust what's been going on here. Not for a long time." The next morning, Everett and Jack began their search. They combed the barn, the silos, and even the old equipment shed, looking for any other signs that Robert had been on to something dangerous. Jack took soil samples, peering at the earth like an experienced detective, his hands steady as he collected the dirt and poured it into glass vials. "I've seen this before," Jack muttered as he looked at the samples, his eyes narrowing. "This soil's been contaminated. There's something in here that shouldn't be. Not just your average pesticide. This is something different." Everett's blood ran cold. "Different? What do you mean?" Jack paused, his expression serious. "These levels, this soil's been exposed to something far stronger than anything we use on crops. Something that lingers. Something that affects not just the crops, but the ground itself. You might want to prepare yourself, Everett. Your brother didn't just stumble onto something, He uncovered a problem that goes deeper than just chemicals in the ground. Everett stood frozen, the weight of Jack's words sinking in. But why keep it hidden? Why not tell anyone? Jack shook his head slowly. That's the real question, isn't it? Who would have the power to keep something like this under wraps? Who could have made it so Robert felt he had to hide what he was doing? Everett's mind raced. The answer was clear: someone with a lot to lose. Someone powerful enough to bury the truth. The local agricultural cooperatives, the landowners, or even larger corporations. They could all have a stake in keeping this under wraps. No one wanted to be caught with illegal chemicals, especially when they were tied to a major food source. Everett felt the anger bubbling inside him. The thought of Robert being silenced for uncovering something like this, something so dangerous, so hidden, made his blood boil. "We need to find out who's behind this, Jack," Everett said through gritted teeth. "We need to go to the source." Jack nodded grimly. "But it's not going to be easy. You start poking around in places like this, you make enemies. Big ones." By the end of the week, Everett had learned just how deep the conspiracy went. It wasn't just about pesticides, it was about control. Local agribusinesses were dumping illegal, highly toxic chemicals into the soil, and the silos were being used to store not just grain, but dangerous substances meant for mass agricultural use. Whoever was behind this had been using the farm to secretly test the effects of these chemicals, on the land, on crops, and possibly even on the people who worked here. Everett and Jack now faced an impossible task: exposing the truth without drawing attention from the very people who would stop at nothing to protect their secret. As the investigation deepened, the shadows around the farm grew darker. Everett couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, waiting for them to slip up. The clock was ticking. And as Everett prepared for his next move, he couldn't help but wonder just how much further he was willing to go to uncover the truth. Would the land he loved become his undoing, just like it had for Robert? Everett couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The sense of looming danger was growing, tightening around him like the chokehold of the land he had once loved. Robert had been right. The silos were hiding something, and that something was far more dangerous than Everett had ever anticipated. Jack's findings in the soil had confirmed what he had feared: this wasn't just about agricultural neglect. There was something far more insidious at work here. With the soil samples in hand, Everett decided to pay a visit to someone who had always been a shadow in the background of Bradbury's farming community, Lyle Bennett, the head of the local agricultural co-op. Lyle wasn't just any farmer, he had his hands in almost every business in town. His co-op controlled most of the crops, the grain, the feed, everything. The man had money, power, and influence. And, if Everett was right, Lyle Bennett was connected to whatever secret Robert had uncovered. It was late afternoon when Everett knocked on the door of Lyle's sprawling ranch house, just off the main road that led out of town. The place was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of a tractor engine in the distance, echoing across the fields. Lyle wasn't hard to find. He was sitting on the porch, nursing a glass of iced tea, his gaze distant as he watched the sunset over the fields. His eyes flickered when Everett approached, a flash of recognition before he set the glass down, his expression unreadable. "Everett Harper," Lyle greeted, standing to shake his hand. "Haven't seen you round here in a while. What brings you to my neck of the woods?" Everett met his handshake firmly but didn't return the casual tone. "I need to talk to you, Lyle. About the farm. And about Robert." Lyle's face didn't betray any emotion, but Everett saw his jaw tighten at the mention of Robert's name. "Robert's been gone a long time. Not much to talk about, Everett. The sheriff's closed that case." "I know the sheriff's version of the story," Everett replied, his voice hardening. "But I think there's more to it than that. I found something on the farm, something Robert left behind. He knew something, Lyle. And I think you do too." Lyle's eyes flickered briefly toward the fields, his face momentarily shifting with a look of concern, but it was gone in an instant. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice smooth, but with an edge of warning. "Robert's disappearance was a family matter. I suggest you leave it that way." "Maybe you don't understand, Lyle," Everett pressed, stepping forward slightly. "I don't care about the past anymore. But I do care about what Robert uncovered. And I won't let you bury it." Lyle's smile faded, replaced by something colder. He took a step back, his posture stiffening as he crossed his arms. "You're digging into things that don't concern you. You'd be wise to back off, Everett. You don't want to start poking around places where people are trying to keep things quiet." "Quiet?" Everett's pulse quickened. "You mean the silos, don't you? You've been using them, haven't you? Not just for grain, but for something far worse. I've seen what's buried there. The land's been poisoned, Lyle. And Robert found out about it. That's why he's gone." For a long moment, Lyle didn't speak. He stood there, watching Everett with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of Everett's neck stand up. Then, with a sigh, Lyle spoke, his voice low and controlled. You think you know something, Everett, but you don't. This town, this land, it's all tied together. Things have to be kept running. People like you, like me, we keep it going. Without us, this place dies. Do you understand that? Everett's mind raced. What does that have to do with Robert? It's got everything to do with Robert, Lyle said, his voice barely a whisper now, his gaze never leaving Everett's face. Robert thought he could fix things. Thought he could take on powers he didn't understand. He got too close. And when you get too close, people like me, we don't let you walk away. Everett's stomach turned. The implication hung between them like a dark cloud, heavy and suffocating. I didn't want it to go like this, Lyle continued, his voice soft but menacing. But now that you're poking around, Everett, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Everett took a step back, his chest tightening. What are you going to do, Lyle? Lyle smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You should have stayed away, Everett. You should have let it be. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken threats, before Lyle finally broke it. Go home, Everett. I don't want to see you here again. And I certainly don't want to hear you speaking Robert's name like that. Everett stared at him for a long moment before turning on his heel, his mind spinning. He had what he needed. Lyle's words, though cryptic, had confirmed everything. Robert had uncovered something that threatened the balance Lyle and others in town had fought so hard to maintain. And now, with Everett on the verge of discovering the truth, Lyle wasn't about to let him continue unchallenged. That night, after hours of pacing in his living room, Everett couldn't shake the feeling that his visit to Lyle's house had been a warning. The threat wasn't subtle, it was right there in Lyle's cold smile, in the way his voice had dropped to a low whisper. But Everett wasn't backing down. Whatever Lyle was hiding, whatever the farm was being used for, he was going to find out. He had no choice. This wasn't just about his brother anymore. This was about the land. About Bradbury. About the people who had been poisoned, not just by chemicals, but by secrets that had been buried far too long. Tomorrow, he would return to the farm, to the silos, and uncover whatever Lyle and the others had been so determined to keep hidden. The sun had barely risen over the hills of Bradbury, casting a pale golden light over the fields, when Everett made his way back to the silos. His thoughts were a tangled mess, but one thing was clear, Lyle Bennett's warning hadn't been idle. The more Everett pieced together, the more he realized that the mystery behind Robert's disappearance went far deeper than any of them had imagined. Everett knew that he had to push on. But as the morning fog slowly lifted, he couldn't shake the feeling that the entire town was in on it, that everyone from the local co-op to the landowners and perhaps even a few of the sheriff's office knew exactly what was happening and had chosen to look the other way. The land wasn't just being abused, it was being used for something dark, something so far-reaching that it seemed to tie everyone together. Today, he would find the answers. And he would do whatever it took to get them. By mid-morning, Everett was back at the farm, standing in front of the silos, staring up at the towering structures that had once been a symbol of his family's prosperity. Now, they felt like a tomb. He had combed through the silo the day before, but he knew that there was something else buried there, something he hadn't found yet. And if Robert had hidden something in the silos before his disappearance, it was only a matter of time before Everett uncovered it. The door creaked open again, and as Everett stepped inside, he noticed something new. The air inside smelled faintly of something metallic, almost like rust, and the place seemed more ominous than it had the day before. He moved cautiously, his boots echoing in the silence as he made his way toward the far corner of the silo. It was then that he noticed it, an old, forgotten tool chest, half hidden under a tarp. He knelt down, pulling away the tarp to reveal the chest. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, but it seemed undisturbed. The old lock on it was rusted, but Everett easily pried it open with his pocketknife. Inside, he found a collection of various tools, old farm equipment, some broken and others barely used. But as his eyes scanned the contents, he saw something that stood out, a stack of papers, wrapped in rubber bands, with the words, "Confidential," stamped across the top. Everett's heart raced as he picked them up. He hadn't seen those words in years, not since his father's time. His father had always kept things organized, and the idea of confidential anything on the farm was rare. With shaking hands, he unwrapped the papers, scanning the first few lines. The documents were related to pesticides, specific types of chemicals and mixtures used for crop treatment. But these weren't just any pesticides. Some of the chemicals listed had never been approved for use in the U.S. They were marked with foreign names, substances that didn't seem to belong in the country's standard agricultural practices. Everett's stomach twisted as he read on. There were notes about tests, some of which had been conducted on the farm itself. Tests that involved not just crops, but soil samples, water sources, and even livestock. He felt sick to his stomach. This was what Robert had been trying to expose. He had found something that linked the farm to illegal pesticide use, to toxic chemicals that were being used not just in small amounts, but in large quantities, possibly affecting the entire town. And the papers confirmed it. The tests weren't just for crop health, they were part of a larger experiment, something that had been hidden from everyone, a cover-up designed to keep the farm running at all costs. Everett stood up quickly, his mind reeling. He had to get these papers to Jack. Jack was the only one who could confirm what this meant, who could verify the extent of the contamination. But before he could leave the silo, a shadow fell over the entrance. "Everett," a voice called from behind him. It was Lyle. The man stood in the doorway, his posture stiff and controlled, like a man who had all the power in the world. The harsh sunlight outlined his figure, casting his face in sharp contrast against the darkening silo behind him. "I told you to stay away," Lyle said, his voice calm but threatening. Everett didn't flinch. "You've been using the farm for something more than crops, haven't you? These papers, Lyle. This isn't about farming. This is about chemicals, about testing things you shouldn't be." Lyle stepped forward, his expression hardening. "I don't know what you think you found, Everett, but you're wrong. It's not what you think." "I think it's exactly what I think," Everett shot back. "You've been testing these chemicals on the land, on the people. That's why Robert's gone, and that's why you're trying to stop me." Lyle didn't move for a long time. Then, with a slow exhale, he spoke. "You don't get it, do you? This town, this farm, it's all been a part of something bigger. You think you can walk in here and expose the truth? You don't know what you're messing with." "I'm messing with the truth, Lyle. The truth you've tried to bury," Everett replied, his voice unwavering. "And I'm going to make sure it sees the light of day." Lyle smiled, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was cold, calculated. "Then you're making a grave mistake, Everett. You've opened a door you can't close. The people who are behind this, they don't let things like this go. You're too close now." Everett stepped forward, holding the papers firmly in his hand. "Then I'll see it through. Whatever it takes." The two men stood in the dim light of the silo, a tense silence hanging between them. Everett knew that he was on the verge of something big. Something that would shake Bradbury to its core. But at what cost? How far was he willing to go to uncover the truth about his brother's disappearance, and the corruption that had been festering under the surface for years? With Lyle's last warning still echoing in his ears, Everett knew that the danger was only beginning. He wasn't just up against Lyle. He was up against an entire system, a system that would stop at nothing to protect its secrets. And Everett Harper wasn't about to let it win. The silence that followed Lyle's threat felt suffocating. Everett stood there in the dimly lit silo, his heart pounding, the weight of the papers in his hands now feeling like a heavy burden. His mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions, anger, fear, and a sharp, relentless desire for justice. He'd come this far, discovered the truth, and now there was no turning back. Lyle's warning had made one thing clear: exposing the secret would not only be dangerous but could destroy the entire town. But Everett couldn't stop now. He owed it to Robert. He owed it to the land, the people who lived here, and to himself. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. Lyle had left the silo, but the chill that lingered in the air still pressed down on Everett's chest. The threat wasn't empty. He could feel it, the quiet menace that seemed to wrap around the farm like a thick fog, a warning that there were far more powerful forces behind the scenes than anyone could imagine. With the papers secured under his arm, Everett climbed into his truck. He wasn't sure where to go next, but he knew one thing for certain: he needed Jack. Jack was the key to understanding the true scope of what was happening and, more importantly, how to stop it. But the thought of returning to the farm with Lyle's words hanging over him made him uneasy. He wasn't sure how much time he had before someone else came for him, someone who wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to keep the truth hidden. By the time Everett arrived at Jack's house, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the empty fields. The weight of the evening air hung heavy, the smell of impending rain mixing with the earthy scent of the soil. He parked his truck out front and walked up the porch steps, the quiet hum of the evening settling around him. Jack was inside, as expected, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee. "Evening, Jack," Everett said, entering without knocking. "Evening, Everett. What brings you back so soon?" Jack asked, his voice warm but laced with concern. "I found more," Everett replied, sliding the papers across the table. Jack's eyes fell on the documents, and he immediately understood. Without a word, Jack picked them up, scanning through them with quick, practiced eyes. "This is worse than I thought," Jack muttered, his voice low. "These chemicals, they're not just bad for the land, Everett. They're bad for everything. If this is what Robert found, it's no wonder he disappeared." Everett nodded grimly. "Lyle's involved, Jack. I spoke to him today. He warned me to stop digging, said I didn't know what I was messing with. He said the people behind this would never let it get exposed. Jack leaned back in his chair, his face creased with concern. It's not just Lyle, Everett. The people who are behind this, they've got connections. Power. Money. The kind of power that can make someone disappear without a trace. Robert was right to be worried. Everett felt a knot tighten in his stomach. So what do we do now? If they're willing to go this far, how do we stop them? Jack didn't answer right away. He stood up slowly, walking to a cabinet in the corner of the kitchen and pulling out a dusty, old map of the area. He spread it out on the table, tracing the lines of roads, fields, and old farm plots with his finger. There's one place left that we haven't looked, Jack said, his voice steady. There's a storage facility, just outside of town. It's run by the co-op, but it's not listed on any maps. It's where they store the excess chemicals and equipment. It's isolated, off the beaten path. That's where they've been hiding everything. Everett's heart raced. You think that's where Robert went? I don't think it, I know it, Jack replied, his eyes sharp. Robert was tracking something, and if he was getting too close, that's where they would have taken him. We need to go there tonight. The two men set out just after dusk, Everett's truck cutting through the winding roads as the light from the headlights sliced through the growing darkness. The land around them seemed to stretch on forever, empty and silent, like a vast, forgotten expanse. The air was heavy with the smell of rain, and the sky was thick with clouds, dark and foreboding. They reached the storage facility in less than an hour, the place hidden behind a thicket of trees, barely visible from the road. The building was a squat, nondescript warehouse, its metal walls covered in rust. A few broken-down vehicles sat outside, their engines long cold. There were no lights on inside, no movement, but Everett couldn't shake the feeling that someone was waiting for them. They parked a few hundred yards away, and as they approached on foot, Everett could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. There was something about this place that made everything feel wrong, like stepping into the heart of a storm, knowing it would break at any moment. Jack pulled out a flashlight and handed it to Everett, his eyes scanning the perimeter of the building. We're going to need to be quick. If they're hiding anything here, we'll find it, but we need to get in and out before anyone notices. Everett nodded, his pulse quickening as they moved toward the side door of the warehouse. Jack reached for the handle, and with a quiet click, the door opened. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of chemicals and old machinery. The sound of dripping water echoed off the walls, but other than that, the place was eerily silent. As they ventured deeper into the warehouse, Everett's flashlight caught something in the corner of the room, a stack of old crates, tucked away behind a pile of dusty tarps. He felt a rush of adrenaline as he walked toward them, knowing that this could be the breakthrough he had been waiting for. Look at this, Jack whispered, pointing to the crates. This is where they've been storing the chemicals. It's all here, labeled, sealed, and completely off the books. Everett felt his stomach churn as he read the labels on the crates. The chemicals listed weren't even meant for agricultural use, they were dangerous industrial substances, illegal in most parts of the world. And here they were, hidden in plain sight, tucked away in this old warehouse, ready to be used. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. They found us, Jack muttered. Everett turned, just in time to see two men step out from the shadows, guns in hand. The weight of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut. Get out of here, one of them growled. This is your last warning. Everett's mind raced. He knew they were in too deep now. There was no turning back. You should have stayed away, the second man said, stepping closer. Now you've seen too much. And that's a mistake.